Hey everybody, this is Mike with Freeroaming Photography, and in this video we're going to discuss what leading lines are and why they're actually more important than the rule of thirds. And before we get going, just want to remind you I do offer private photography workshops here in Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. So if that's something you're interested in practicing this and many other subjects out in the field and the wild, check out the link in the description below and we'll go discuss that and many other topics. Alright, so jumping in, the rule of thirds is a great rule to fall back on when nothing else is working, but leading lines are what contribute to a really powerful and dynamic composition that can separate your photos from good to outstanding. And why is that? It's because leading lines are just that. They lead your eye through a photo from the foreground to the background, the left to the right, whatever the case. They create lines that your eye wants to follow through the photo to create a more engaging photo. Now, the best examples are going to guide the viewer's eyes from the foreground into the background, and you can find all sorts of natural lines that do that. And what this does, a lot of times, this also creates a better relationship of the subject with its environment and with the background. Now, in the art world, these are known as implied lines and actual lines, and they are essentially exactly what they sound like. Actual lines are literal lines in the photo that will do the job of taking your eye from one part of the photo to another. And these can be anything. They can be shorelines, they can be trees, they can be branches, they can be groupings of rocks or even a big rock itself, or even just a hiking trail itself. Now, implied lines can be harder to find and harder to photograph, but they can create very powerful images because what they do is they're more lines that are hinted at through the subjects and through what's going on within the photo. Some examples of implied lines can be an animal's gaze where it's looking to. It can be clouds in the sky. There can be multiple subjects between the foreground and the background that create an implied line, or even just a clever arrangement of color within the photo. So that's a basic rundown of what leading lines are, but let's look at some examples to get a real feel for how they affect the photo and how they can produce really great results. So here the pronghorn is obviously the subject, but if you look carefully, you'll see leading lines circling throughout the photo. And despite the subject and these leading lines being all in the center, it works because they're all lined up on the rule of thirds, which creates a more dynamic composition. The pronghorn itself isn't in the center, it's the entire composition that is centered, but is also along the rule of thirds, which makes it a really interesting composition. Obviously, the subject in this image is Heart Spring, but if you follow the leading lines, it takes you throughout the rest of the image, including the geysers in the background, indicated by the steam they're putting off. So Heart Spring itself, in addition to the thermophiles from the runoff, are guiding your eye throughout the photo, and they circle back through the steam being emitted from Heart Spring itself. This image of a Swainson's thrush calling works really well for multiple reasons. Even though there's a lot of leaves and branches within the image, it works because the thrush itself is looking up with two larger branches as well as a few smaller branches, all in the same direction. In addition, with the background blurred out, it creates a simple composition with a few intersecting lines in the foreground. A lot of these branches keep your eye moving around, and in addition, this is a great example of leading lines paralleling each other and only subtly hinting at a circular motion in the image. This image of a powerful thunderstorm with lightning striking in the distance is a great example of leading lines from a lot of what we've discussed. You see the actual lines in the creek leading up to the sunset, and above the sunset are some very intense dark clouds. Implied lines guide your eyes from the lighter storm clouds to the darker storm clouds, where a few subtle actual lines bring you right down to the lightning bolt. That lightning bolt guides your eye downward and keeps your eye moving throughout the image. It's quite common to get actual lines to suggest implied lines, and that's what's going on in this image. Here's another one that makes use of both actual and implied lines. Initially, your eye is drawn to the large shadow produced from the small cliff, and as you follow those actual lines up, it leads to me standing on the edge of that cliff. The implied line is when you follow the direction of where I'm looking across the image, where it catches formations in the rock that bring you back down to the shadow. In doing so, you're following a big, large circle throughout the entire image once again. These two barn swallows are making both actual and implied lines. The wingspan of the one flying in creates a small curve that leads directly to the one next to it. The implied line is an entire curve across the top of that image that keeps your eye looking back and forth to each bird. And this is a great example of how to use wildlife to create both implied and actual lines. And this is one of my favorite images that uses both actual and implied lines. The actual lines are a giant herd of elk migrating up a snowy hill. As they go up, they bend around the top, and another small portion of the herd was migrating up with them on the other side of the image. However, our eyes just follow this big long curve, and the implied line is that gap between the two where our eye fills in that gap to create a full circle. This was such a simple and beautiful shape, it made a great black and white image. And this is why black and white photos also make great use of leading lines. By eliminating the color from within the photo, you're reducing that image to only lines and shapes. And that's why a really great black and white image really moves your eye around, and it cuts down the photo to just its bare essentials, to what's needed to be said to convey the feeling and the essence of that photo. You can see in this black and white image how the shapes of the mountains and the clouds are really the only focus going on within the image. Both the ridge line and the curvature of the mountains bring our eye up to that one large cloud, which we then follow across the top to the left, only to fall back down to the bottom left where we circle back around all over again. The simplicity of this composition makes it an ideal black and white photo. In this image from Lower Falls of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone River, sunlight was breaking through the clouds and hitting one particular portion of the canyon as well as the waterfalls. Everything else was shaded, which created a dramatic black and white image. Our eyes immediately drawn to the waterfall first as the main subject, and then we follow the contours of the ridge lines up and to the right, which were what was illuminated by the sunlight. The vertically oriented lines and ridges on the foreground in the canyon wall keep our eye moving back down to circle back around to the waterfall. This is a great example of how light and shadow can create a dramatic black and white image by creating those actual lines. At first glance, this appears like nothing more than an interesting composition of the bottom of a large juniper tree. But if we follow all these branches down into the lower left, we notice the actual subject hiding in plain sight. These branches point to the mountain lion's face peeking out from behind one of the trunks of the trees. The composition of these branches itself works as a black and white image, but it's made extra powerful once you realize that there's a mountain lion hiding within the image. This is an image from Blacktail Butte in Grand Teton National Park, completely covered in snow. Most of the time through the winter, a lot of those ridges are windswept and exposed a little bit, despite however much snow we might be getting. Because this particular winter was incredibly heavy with snow, it got buried much more than usual, creating much smoother and elegant lines rolling across the landscape. Thanks to some storm clouds obscuring the rest of the Teton Mountains, the bulk of the photo is reduced to a lot of these smooth lines bending across the landscape and guiding our eyes left to right and up and down, and vice versa. Only a small hint of the Tetons remains, which only adds to that thanks to some of the tree lines. Implied lines can also come from a lot of movement within wildlife, as is the case with this example. In the Hayden Valley of Yellowstone National Park, this bison was rolling around in the dirt, creating a wallow on the ground. There are a couple of actual lines within the bison on the left side, but a lot of the implied lines come from the right, and they all converge right up at the top of the image at the bison's hoof. Because I wanted to accentuate the implied and actual lines converging at the hoof, this made for an ideal black and white image. Had I left the color in, that would have distracted from a lot of the lines, confusing the composition a little bit. By converting to black and white, it simplified everything and brought out those lines much more. Your best black and white photos are going to emphasize the movement and direction within the photo. And because of that, not every photo makes a good black and white photo. A lot of people just like to click the black and white and do some post-processing on that and think they made a great black and white photo. But in reality, a great black and white photo is defined by a really strong composition through leading lines in some way or another. So at first, just look for lines that create some kind of composition anywhere you are, especially actual lines. Those are the easiest ones to find, and look for those and just try to take photos of those going from one direction to another, and you'll instantly see your composition begin to improve. As that gets easier with practice, all sorts of leading lines will begin to jump out at you, especially implied lines and many other types of compositions and arrangements to create more powerful images. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comments below. And if I missed anything or you want any more clarity on something, definitely leave that down in the comment below. And if you want to come out with me on a private photography workshops, check out that link down in the description, and we will go out and I will help you with composition or any other subjects or settings that you're curious about or want more information on. And thanks for watching, and happy trails.